The orbital station Asterion hung in the black void like a jeweled spiderweb, a sprawling mess of docking arms, habitation rings, and diplomatic spires that served as the fragile bridge between two civilizations that had spent the last 50 years trying to annihilate each other. For Ryan, it was just a place where the air scrubbers always smelled like ozone and burnt coffee, and where things broke faster than he could fix them. He was currently wedged halfway inside the hydraulic housing of Docking Clamp 7, a space so cramped that his shoulders scraped against the cold durasteel with every breath. The clamp had seized up again, a victim of the station's neglected infrastructure. The magnetic actuator was covered in grime, a black sludge that coated Ryan's gloves and smeared across his cheek when he tried to wipe the sweat from his eyes. One final turn, he muttered to himself. Gripping the wrench with white-knuckled force, he heaved. The bolt shrieked, a high-pitched scream of metal shearing against metal. In an instant, the cramped maintenance crawlspace vanished. The sound tore through Ryan's mind, transforming into the dying wail of a heavy cruiser's atmospheric seal rupturing. He was back in the cockpit of a fighter, drifting through the debris field of the skirmish at Sector 4. The stars were spinning too fast. The comms were filled with static and the wet, choking sounds of men dying in the vacuum. He could see the Velian warship looming ahead, its hull rippling with that terrified organic bioluminescence, preparing to fire the beam that would turn his squad into scattered atoms. Ryan stopped breathing. His hand froze on the wrench. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the bundle of wires in front of him, but all he saw was fire. "Hey, Ryan, you maintain orbit in there, or did the hydraulics eat you?" The voice cracked through the illusion like a hammer through glass. Ryan gasped, inhaling a lungful of stale, greasy air. The burning ships vanished. The screams faded into the distant hum of the station's ventilation fans. He was back in the crawl space. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, forcing his pulse to slow down. 1, 2, 3. He was not at war. He was a mechanic. He was safe, which was a relative term on a station held together by duct tape and political promises. "I am coming out," Ryan shouted back, his voice rougher than he intended. He shimmied backward, kicking his legs until he slid out onto the grated floor of the maintenance bay. Miller was standing there, leaning against a stack of crates with a data pad in hand, looking far too clean for a double shift. Miller was young, barely 25, full of the kind of naive energy that Ryan had lost a decade ago. "You were quiet for a long time," Miller said, eyeing him. "I was about to call salvage to come scrape you out." Ryan stood up, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag that was arguably dirtier than his hands. "The actuator is rusted through," Ryan said, ignoring the concern in the younger man's eyes. "I bypassed the safety regulator. It will hold for the arrival, but if they try to dock anything heavier than a frigate, the whole arm is going to shear off." Miller whistled low. "Well, good thing the Velians are bringing their heavy cruisers then. Imagine that. The diplomatic summit starts with an Imperial warship tearing a hole in the welcome mat. That would be one way to restart the war." "Don't give them any ideas," Ryan grunted. He walked over to the tool bench and tossed the wrench down with a heavy clatter. The noise made him flinch internally, a micro-tremor in his hand that he hid by reaching for his water flask. The station was at a fever pitch. In less than 48 hours, the high delegation of the Velian Empire would arrive to sign the Treaty of Solvara. It was the end game of the ceasefire. The treaty promised trade rights, technology sharing, and a formal end to hostilities. In exchange, humanity was granting the Empire military access to certain shipping lanes and docking privileges on stations like Asterion. To the politicians, it was a new golden age. To the soldiers who had survived the front lines, it felt like surrender dressed up in silk. Rian took a long drink of lukewarm water. He could feel the vibration of the station through the soles of his boots. Massive retrofit drones were buzzing outside the viewports, welding ceremonial banners to the hull. "You going to the concourse later?" Miller asked, tapping away on his pad. "They are setting up the holographic displays and free drinks at the Falling Star to celebrate the peace," Rian snorted. "I think I will pass. I prefer to keep my head down when the brass is in town. Besides, peace is just the intermission between wars. I am not going to drink to that. You are a ray of sunshine, Rian. A real morale booster." "I try," Rian said, managing a dry, lopsided smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned back to the locker to strip off his heavy work vest. Underneath, his gray undershirt clung to his chest, revealing the scar tissue that ran from his shoulder down to his hip, a souvenir from a Velian plasma burn. He traced the edge of it subconsciously. The war was over, they said. But the station was full of ghosts, and Rian was pretty sure he was one of them, just haunting a mechanic's jumpsuit. While Ryan scraped grease from his knuckles, a different kind of preparation was taking place 3,000 miles away, aboard the Velian flagship Ethelgard. The silence here was absolute. The air did not smell of ozone. It smelled of ozone-scrubbed sterility and crushed lavender. The walls were not metal, but a grown, pearlescent coral that hummed with a low, thrumming biorhythm, syncing with the heartbeats of the crew. In the center of the preparation chamber, Princess Lyra stood perfectly still. She was a statue of flesh and light. Her skin, the color of moonlight on water, was currently being painted by 3 silent attendants. They used brushes dipped in bioluminescent fluid, tracing ancient glowing sigils down the curve of her spine, across her collarbones, and spiraling around her arms. Lyra stared straight ahead, her golden eyes unfocused. She could feel the cold wetness of the paint, but she tried to detach herself from the sensation. To be a princess of the Velian Empire was to be an object. She knew this. She had been taught this since she was old enough to walk. Her body was not her own. It was a vessel for the bloodline, a canvas for the culture, and most terrifyingly, a weapon for the state. "My lady," one of the attendants whispered, bowing low. "The grafting is ready." Lyris did not flinch. "Proceed." The attendant opened a containment pod. Inside lay the ceremonial armor pieces. They were not dead metal. They were living tissue, cultivated from the same genetic stock as the ship's hull. They pulsed softly, veins of silver light throbbing within the carapace. The attendants pressed the armor against Lyris's skin on her shoulders, her forearms, her hips. The grafts latched on. Lyris bit the inside of her cheek as thousands of microscopic filaments burrowed into her pores, connecting with her nervous system. A rush of cold adrenaline flooded her veins. Her vision sharpened to a razor's edge. Her emotions, usually a chaotic storm she kept hidden, were suddenly amplified and fed into the armor. If she felt anger, the armor would harden. If she felt fear, it would shimmer. Now, she forced herself to feel nothing. A perfect, icy void. "You are the Empire's perfect body," the High Priestess had told her before she left the homeworld, "a symbol of our evolution, beautiful and deadly." Lyris looked at her reflection in the polished wall. She looked terrifying. She looked magnificent. She looked like a stranger. The attendants bowed and retreated, leaving her alone in the shimmering chamber. A moment later, a shadow detached itself from the far wall. It was Kaer, her personal attendant and perhaps the only person in the universe who saw her as a person rather than a prop. Kaya was older, her face lined with worry, her own biomarkings dim and faded. "They are beautiful," Kaya said softly, gesturing to the grafts. "They are heavy," Lyris replied, her voice echoing slightly in the silence. "They feel like shackles." Kaya moved closer, checking the corridor to ensure they were not being monitored. She lowered her voice to a whisper that barely carried over the hum of the ship. "You must be careful on Asterion. Lyris, I have intercepted transmission fragments." Lyris turned, the living armor shifting with her movement like a second skin. "What kind of fragments?" "The summit," Kaya said, her eyes dark with fear. "There is chatter on the encrypted bands, not just from the human separatists, but from our own channels. They say the treaty signing is a stage. A stage for what? For a tragedy." Kaya's hands trembled as she adjusted the silk drape of Lyris's skirt. "There is talk of a false flag attack, an incident designed to frame the humans as traitors and justify a total conquest. And Lyris. Lord Kael Viron is named in the logs." Lyris felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Lord Kael, the admiral of the Third Fleet, the man her father, the Emperor, had arranged for her to bond with. He was a war hero to the people, a monster to his enemies, and a cold, calculating presence that made Lyris's skin crawl whenever he entered a room. "Kael wants the war to restart," Lyris whispered. "He has always said the peace is an insult to the fallen. He is conspiring with human profiteers," Kaya said. "Men who sell weapons to both sides. If something happens to you down there, if you are attacked, it would be the spark they need." Lyris looked down at her hands. The glowing sigils on her skin pulsed with a sudden spike of anxiety. The armor on her forearms tightened, reacting to her fear. "They want to use me," she said, bitterness coating her tongue. "I am the bait, the sacrificial lamb dressed in diamonds." She paced the room, the movement restless and predatory. She had spent 20 years in palaces, trained in diplomacy, combat, and art, yet she felt more trapped now than ever. She was the heir to an empire that spanned 12 star systems, yet she had no say in her own future. "I need to see it," Lyris said suddenly. "See what?" Kaya asked. "The station, the humans, not through a viewport, and not from behind a podium. I need to see what we are walking into." "Lyris, you cannot. The security protocols can be bypassed," Lyris interrupted. She reached for a small device on the vanity table, a personal shimmer field generator. It was a piece of spycraft tech she had lifted from the armory years ago. A small rebellion in a life of obedience. It bends light. It masks the bioluminescence. I will just be another traveler in the crowd. "It is too dangerous," Kaya pleaded. "Staying here and waiting to be a pawn is dangerous," Lyris snapped. Her eyes flashed, and for a second, she looked every inch the dangerous creature the Empire had built her to be. Then she softened, reaching out to touch Kaya's arm. "Please, I need an hour. Just 1 hour to feel like I exist for myself, before I belong to history." Kaya looked at her, saw the desperation in the young woman's eyes, and sighed. 1 hour. "Lyris, if you are not back before the honor guard assembles, I cannot protect you." Rian was walking. He did that a lot when the memories got too loud. He had showered, scrubbing the grease from his skin, but the smell of the station, recycled air, and desperation clung to his clothes. He wore his civilian jacket, a worn leather thing with a high collar, keeping his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The public concourse of Asterion was a chaotic assault on the senses. It was a massive cylindrical boulevard that ran the length of the station's central spine. Neon signs in English, Mandarin, and Spanish flickered alongside the jagged, flowing script of the Velian trade tongue. Street vendors shouted over the roar of the crowd, selling synth noodles, charred meat skewers, and cheap trinkets. Rian navigated the crush of bodies with the unconscious grace of a soldier. He tracked exits. He watched hands. He scanned faces. It was exhausting, but he didn't know how to turn it off. Above the crowd, massive holographic screens projected the image of the Earth President and the Velian ambassador shaking hands. The image was looped, a perpetual moment of manufactured harmony. A new dawn for the galaxy, the announcer's voice boomed, overly cheerful. Unity, prosperity, future. Rian muttered a curse word under his breath. He stopped near a viewing railing that looked out over the lower levels of the market. Below him, a group of children were running through the stalls, chasing a drone toy. They were laughing. They didn't know that the metal floor they ran on had been patched up after a hull breach 3 years ago that sucked 200 people into space. They didn't know that the unity being preached above was being brokered by men who had signed execution orders for entire colonies. Rian reached into his pocket and thumbed the smooth surface of a small metal disc. It was a coin from the colony of Jericho. His squad leader, Sergeant Holloway, had given it to him the night before the ambush. For luck, kid. Holloway had said. Holloway had burned to death in a cockpit that wouldn't eject. Rian was the only one who came back. Lucky, Rian thought bitterly. He turned away from the railing, needing to move, needing to outwalk the ghosts. He headed toward the transit tram station, head down, shoulders hunched against the weight of the world. Lyris moved through the crowd like a ghost. The shimmer field was working, but it was disorienting. It bent the light around her body, dulling the vibrant glow of her skin to a matte, human beige. It hid the ridges of her bioarmor under the illusion of a heavy, nondescript cloak. To the eyes of the people around her, she was just another tall woman in a hood, likely a traveler or a pilgrim. Her heart was racing, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was intoxicating. The noise was deafening. Humans were so loud. They shouted to each other across the walkways. They laughed with their mouths wide open. They argued over prices with wild gestures. On the Velian homeworld, public spaces were hushed, orderly, and synchronized. Here, it was a riot of chaos. She saw a young couple leaning against a support pillar. The man had his hand on the woman's waist. They were kissing, oblivious to the thousands of people streaming past them. Lyris stared, mesmerized. It was so casual, so free. No one was arranging their union. No one was checking their genetic compatibility markers. They simply wanted each other. A sharp pang of envy pierced her chest. She touched her own stomach, where the bioarmor felt cold and rigid. She was a masterpiece of genetic engineering, designed to be perfect. Yet she had never felt a touch that wasn't clinical or ceremonial. She moved deeper into the crowd, her eyes wide, drinking in the sights. She stopped to look at a holographic map of the station, entranced by the sheer chaotic sprawl of the human architecture. It made no sense. It was organic in a messy, desperate way. She was looking up at the blue light of the map, her hood slipping back slightly, her focus entirely on the incomprehensible maze of the station. She didn't see the man coming from the tram exit, head down, walking with the swift, blind purpose of someone trying to escape his own thoughts. The collision was hard. Rian had been staring at the floor, replaying the sound of the bolt shearing in the maintenance bay, when he slammed into something solid. It wasn't like bumping into a wall. It was like hitting a statue. Impact. Rian's breath left him in a rush. His multi-tool, which he had clipped to his belt, clattered loudly to the deck. The person he hit stumbled back, momentarily losing their balance. Instinct took over. Rian didn't think. He moved. His hand shot out, grabbing the stranger's arm to steady them, his other hand coming up to catch their shoulder. "Easy," he said, the word automatic. He looked up. For a single heartbeat, the universe seemed to glitch. As his hand gripped her arm, Rian felt something wrong. Beneath the rough fabric of the cloak, he didn't feel soft flesh or standard clothing. He felt a hum, a low, vibrational thrumming, like touching a live power conduit. The stranger gasped, and then the air around her shimmered. The impact had jarred the field generator on her belt. The illusion fractured. For a split second, the dull beige of her face dissolved into a translucent, diamond-hard clarity. Rian saw eyes that were not human, irises of liquid gold with vertical feline pupils that widened in shock. He saw skin that seemed to contain its own starlight, patterned with faint, glowing violet lines that pulsed in time with the thrumming he felt under his hand. He saw the sharp, elegant curve of cheekbones that were too perfect, too angular. He was holding a Velian, and not just any Velian. The markings, the bioluminescence. This was high caste. The shimmer field snapped back into place a second later, restoring the illusion of the hooded human woman. But the image was burned into Rian's retinas. He stood there, frozen, his hand still gripping her arm. The heat radiating from her was intense, fever-hot, seeping through his gloves. He should have let go. He should have backed away. He should have apologized and run. But he didn't. He couldn't. Lyris looked up at the human male who had just nearly knocked her over. He was rough-looking, with grease stains on his neck and eyes that held a depth of pain she recognized instantly. It was the same look she saw in the mirror. She felt his hand on her arm. It was strong, calloused, and shockingly steady. His other hand was on her shoulder. He was holding her up. Her empathy implant, the one connected to her armor, flared. She felt a wave of his emotion crash into her. Confusion, sudden fear, and beneath it all, a strange, desperate loneliness. It was the most honest thing she had felt in years. A reckless, dangerous impulse seized her. She was disguised. She was free. She was invisible, yet he had seen her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in. She moved closer, invading his personal space, her face inches from his. She saw the blood rush to his cheeks. She saw his pupils dilate. She pitched her voice low, a whisper that was meant only for him, slipping under the roar of the crowd. Lost in thought, human? She tilted her head, a small, mischievous smile playing on her lips, a smile that felt foreign and exhilarating. "Do you like my body?" The question hung between them, heavy and electric. It was a taunt. It was a genuine question from a woman who had only ever been admired as an object. It was a challenge. Rian felt the blood drain from his head and then rush back in a torrent of heat. He stammered, his mouth opening and closing. I... He stared at her. The question was absurd. It was aggressive. And yet, the way she said it, half mocking, but with a strange, wide-eyed curiosity, floored him. He could smell a scent coming from her, something like ozone and crushed flowers, alien and intoxicating. I'm sorry," Rian managed to choke out. He released her arm as if it had burned him, stepping back. "I wasn't looking, I just collided with you." He tried to summon his usual sarcasm, his defense mechanism. "Usually I buy a lady a drink before I tackle her in a hallway," he said, the joke falling flat and clumsy from his lips. Lyris didn't laugh, but her eyes crinkled at the corners. She watched him, fascinated by his flustered sincerity. The courtiers back home would have recited a poem or made a polished bow. This man turned red and tried to make a bad joke. "You are clumsy," she said, her voice like velvet wrapped around steel. "And you are very loud inside." Rian blinked. Loud inside? A charged silence stretched between them. The crowd flowed around them like water around a stone. For a moment, Rian forgot the station, the treaty, and the dead squad mates. He just felt the pull of this woman's gravity. It was a physical sensation, a tug in his chest that terrified him. "Who are you?" Ryan whispered. Lyris opened her mouth to answer, to give a name that wasn't her title. But before she could speak, the air shifted. A heavy rhythmic thudding of boots approached. The crowd parted instantly. "Make way, Imperial Honor Guard! Make way!" A squad of Velian soldiers clad in full ceremonial armor swept down the center of the concourse. They were heading toward the VIP docking bays. Lyris stiffened. The playfulness vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of cold fear. She glanced at the soldiers, then back at Ryan. She adjusted her hood, pulling it low. Her hand brushed Ryan's chest for a fleeting second, a touch that felt like a spark of static electricity. "Goodbye, human," she whispered. She turned and vanished into the throng of people, moving with a fluid grace that no human could mimic. Rian stood there, alone in the middle of the corridor. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He looked down at his hand, the one that had held her arm. It was trembling. He bent down and picked up his multi-tool. He felt like he had just lost something important. Something he hadn't even known he was looking for. "Do you like my body?" The words echoed in his mind. He stared at the spot where she had vanished, a strange, hollow ache opening up in his chest, high above the concourse, in a restricted security hub. A silent observer watched the feed. The figure sat in the dark, surrounded by banks of monitors. On screen 42, the footage of the collision played. The observer tapped a key. The footage rewound, played again, rewound. The observer zoomed in, frame 1492, the glitch, the blur of the shimmer field failing, the flash of golden eyes and bioluminescent skin. The observer's finger hovered over the console. A red box appeared around Lyris's hooded figure, tagging it, Target Alpha. Then, the cursor moved to the man, the mechanic with the leather jacket and the haunted eyes. A new box appeared around Ryan's face. Match found, Ryan Kalin. ID 894 Delta, rank, Sergeant retired, status, mechanic. The observer typed a single command into the log, flag for observation, priority 1. The file was saved. The game had begun. The hydraulic wrench in Rian's hand felt heavier than usual, a dead weight of cold steel that seemed to anchor him to the grimy reality of the maintenance deck. He was supposed to be recalibrating the pressure sensors on the secondary airlock, a task he could usually perform in his sleep. But for the last 10 hours, Rian had been awake, and he had been useless. Every time he closed his eyes, the darkness behind his eyelids was not the familiar, comforting void he used to block out the station's noise. Instead, it was a canvas for a single, looping memory. He saw the flash of golden eyes. He felt the phantom warmth of a body pressed against his, radiating a heat that defied the chill of the corridor. He heard that voice, a velvet whisper wrapping around his spine. "Do you like my body, human?" Ryan slammed the wrench onto the workbench, the loud clang echoing through the empty bay. He ran a grease-stained hand through his short, cropped hair, exhaling a breath that was half sigh, half growl. He was losing his mind. That was the only explanation. He was a veteran of the serious front. He had seen ships burn and men die. He had spent a decade learning to wall off his emotions behind a fortress of sarcasm and indifference. He did not get flustered by women in hallways. He certainly did not obsess over a stranger's taunting whisper. But it was not just the attraction. God knows he felt that. A raw, magnetic pull that sat heavy in his gut. But it was tangled with something darker. Rian looked down at his hands. They were scarred. Capable hands. Hands that had fixed engines and fired rifles. To him, the body was a machine. It was meat and bone, fragile, easily broken, and destined to rot. In the war, bodies were casualties. They were things you stepped over to get to the extraction point. He felt a surge of shame, hot and acidic, rising in his throat. When he had held her, just for that second, he hadn't thought about death. He had thought about life. He had felt a desperate, starving hunger to be close to that warmth, and that terrified him. Wanting something that beautiful felt like a betrayal of the ghosts he carried. It felt dangerous. You are staring at a wrench like it owes you money. Rian, Miller called out, walking past with a crate of atmospheric filters. Snap out of it. The big show is starting. Rian blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog. What show? The arrival, Miller said, jerking his thumb toward the main viewport. The Velian delegation, they are docking now. Come on. Unless you want to spend the rest of your life staring at valves. Rian hesitated, then followed. He needed the distraction. He needed to remind himself that Velians were not mysterious women in hoods. They were politicians and admirals, the architects of the war that had ruined his life. The main observation deck was packed. Station personnel, civilians, and security officers pressed against the thick armor-glass, watching the spectacle outside. Rian stood near the back, crossing his arms, his expression guarded. The Velian flagship, the Ethelgard, was a monstrosity of beauty. It did not look built, it looked grown. The hull was a spiraling shell of iridescent white and silver, pulsing with a faint rhythmic light that seemed to breathe against the backdrop of the stars. It dwarfed the human destroyers escorting it, making them look like blocky, primitive toys. The docking tube extended, locking onto the station's VIP airlock with a shudder that vibrated through the deck plates. Here they come, someone whispered. Large holographic screens along the walls flickered to life, broadcasting the interior of the arrival bay. Rian watched with a cynical curl to his lip. The red carpet was rolled out. The station commander stood stiffly in his dress uniform. Then, the airlock hissed open. A procession of Velian guards marched out first, their armor gleaming like polished obsidian. Then came the diplomats, tall and slender, draped in flowing robes of deep indigo. And then, she appeared. Ryan's breath hitched in his chest. He felt like he had been punched in the solar plexus. Walking in the center of the group was a figure who looked like a goddess carved from starlight. She wore a ceremonial gown that seemed to be woven from spun glass and liquid mercury, leaving her shoulders and arms bare to display the intricate, glowing patterns of her skin. Her hair was an intricate sculpture of braids and silver weave. She was terrifyingly beautiful, radiant, and utterly untouchable. The camera zoomed in on her face. It was her, the curve of the cheekbone, the tilt of the chin, the golden eyes that scanned the crowd with a mix of regal boredom and hidden sharpness. That is Princess Lyris, Miller said, his voice hushed with awe. The daughter of the Emperor. They say her biomods alone cost more than this entire station. Rian stood frozen. The blood roared in his ears. He had collided with the princess of the Velian Empire. He had grabbed the heir to the throne. He, a grease monkey with a dishonorable discharge and a drinking problem, had held the most valuable political asset in the galaxy and stared at her like a love-struck teenager. "Do you like my body?" The memory of the question shifted. It wasn't a flirtation. It was a test. Or a trap. Rian turned abruptly, pushing his way through the crowd. "Hey, where are you going?" Miller asked. "Back to work," Ryan snapped, his voice rough. "I have vents to fix. I do not belong here." He walked away fast, but he couldn't outrun the image of her face on the screen. He felt exposed. He felt foolish. And worst of all, beneath the panic, that crushing weight of longing was heavier than ever. 2 hours later, Rian was shoulder-deep in a ceiling access panel in the VIP residential corridor. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. The station's environmental controls were fluctuating in the luxury suites, and Rian had been the only senior tech available with the clearance to access the secure sector. He was currently wedged in a crawl space above the main hallway, recalibrating a temperature regulator that had decided to freeze the corridor. He was sweating, cursing silently as he twisted a stubborn, glorious nut. Below him, the sound of a door hissing open echoed in the quiet hallway. Voices drifted up through the grate, a melodic, frustrated voice he recognized instantly. "If I have to wear this thing for one more hour, care. I am going to cause a diplomatic incident just so they arrest me and let me change into prison fatigues." Rian froze. He stopped breathing. "It is traditional, Highness," a calmer, older voice replied. "It is torture," Lyra snapped. Rian could hear the rustle of heavy fabric. "Look at this bodice. It is rigid. It pushes my ribs into my lungs. These ceremonial outfits were clearly designed by sadists with no understanding of how bodies move. I feel like a wrapped gift, not a person." "You looked magnificent on the broadcast," Care soothed. "I looked like a statue," Lyris retorted. "A very shiny, very expensive statue. I could barely walk down the ramp without tipping over." "Did you see the commander?" He looked at me like I was a piece of artillery he wanted to inspect. Rian bit his lip to stop the laugh that bubbled up in his chest. It was absurd. The ethereal goddess he had seen on the screen was down there complaining about her underwear like a normal person. It humanized her in a way that shattered his terror. He shifted his weight to get a better look through the grate. The panel beneath his elbow gave a loud metallic creak. The voices below stopped instantly. "What was that?" Care's voice was sharp, alarmed. Rian closed his eyes. "Idiot!" "Sensor sweep," Lyris commanded, her voice dropping into a tone of absolute authority. Rian sighed. There was no point in hiding. He wasn't an assassin, and getting caught lurking in the ceiling was a good way to get shot by the Royal Guard. "It is just me," Rian called out, his voice echoing in the vent. "Maintenance. Don't shoot." He unlatched the grate and pushed it open. Swinging his legs down, he dropped to the floor with a practiced thud, dusting off his hands. He looked up to find 2 Valian women staring at him. Care looked ready to call for security. Laris looked delighted. She had stripped off the heavy outer robe of her ceremonial gown, leaving her in a sleeker, form-fitting undersuit of shimmering white silk. The glowing patterns on her skin were pulsing with a soft, violet light. Her eyes widened as she recognized him. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Well," Lyris said, crossing her arms, "if it isn't the clumsy human..." Ryan straightened up, trying to salvage some dignity despite being covered in dust. "Your Highness, I see you managed to escape the sadist dress designers," Care gasped. "You heard that?" "The vents have excellent acoustics," Ryan said, daring to meet Lyris's gaze. "For the record, prison fatigues are itchy. I would stick with the silk." Lyris laughed. It was a genuine sound, bright and musical, startling Rian with its warmth. She stepped closer, waving Care off when the attendant tried to intervene. "So," she said, tilting her head, tilting her. "First you tackle me in a public concourse, and now you are spying on me from the ceiling. Should I be worried, mechanic? Or are you just exceptionally bad at staying away from me?" "I was fixing the temperature," Rian said, feeling his face heat up again. "You were freezing the corridor, literally." "I run cold," Lyris said, her eyes dancing. "It is a side effect of the enhancements." She gestured vaguely to her body. The playfulness was still there, but Ryan saw a flicker of shadow behind her eyes when she mentioned the enhancements. Suddenly, the deck plates beneath them gave a violent lurch. The station's artificial gravity generators, notorious for their instability during high-power cycles, stuttered. For a second, gravity dropped to half its normal weight, then slammed back sideways as the stabilizers corrected. Lyris, caught off guard in her slippery silk shoes, stumbled hard. Rian moved before the floor even settled. He lunged forward, catching her around the waist as she fell toward him. The momentum spun them around, and he slammed his back against the wall, taking the impact to shield her. They ended up pressed together, chest to chest, pinned against the corridor wall. "I have got you," Rian breathed, his voice rough. The world seemed to narrow down to the two of them. Rian could feel every inch of her against him. The silk was thin. Beneath it, her body was firm, strong, and radiating that intense alien heat. He could feel her heart racing against his own chest, a frantic thump, thump, thump that matched his own rhythm. His hands were gripping her waist tightly, too tightly, perhaps. But it wasn't a possessive grip. It was the grip of a soldier protecting a civilian. A shield. Lyris looked up at him, her eyes wide and startled. Her hands had come up to rest on his chest, her fingers curling into his jacket. "You caught me," she whispered. "Habit," Ryan murmured. He didn't let go. He couldn't. And then, it happened. Lyris's empathic implant, the living biotech grafted to her nervous system, flared to life. It was designed to read the emotions of a room, to detect threats for the princess. But at this proximity, with adrenaline spiking in both of them, the connection was too direct. It was a floodgate opening. Lyris gasped as the feedback loop hit her. She didn't just see Ryan, she felt him. And what she felt broke her heart. She felt the crushing weight of his vigilance, the way he was constantly scanning the room for threats. She felt the cold, jagged shards of his memory, the smell of burning metal, the sound of a hull breaching, the weight of a dying friend in his arms, the terrible, suffocating guilt of being the one who survived. It wasn't a picture. It was a raw, visceral sensation of grief and trauma that washed over her like a tidal wave. Rian felt her stiffen. He saw her eyes dilate, the golden irises swallowing the white. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt a sudden, terrifying vulnerability, as if she was seeing the darkest parts of his soul. "Ryan," she breathed, saying his name for the first time. It sounded like a prayer, instead of pulling away in horror at his brokenness. She leaned into him. The armor on her skin softened, the bioluminescence shifting from a startled violet to a warm, pulsating amber, the color of comfort. She pushed her own feeling back through the link, a wave of profound, aching compassion. "I see you. You are not alone." The psychic feedback hit Rian like a physical blow. He gasped, his knees buckling slightly. For a moment, the wall between them vanished. They were just two terrified, lonely consciousnesses clinging to each other in the dark. The gravity stabilizer hummed, restoring normal weight. The spell shattered. They jerked apart, breathless and shaking. Rian stared at her, his chest heaving. "What? What was that?" Lyris touched her temple, looking equally shaken. Her skin was flushed. My implant. It resonated. I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude. You saw, Ryan said, his voice a harsh whisper. He felt naked. You saw it all. I felt it, Lyris corrected softly. She reached out a hand, hovering inches from his face, but pulled back. You carry so much weight, Ryan. How do you stand? I don't know, he admitted, the sarcasm completely gone. Before they could say anything else, Kyr stepped forward, her face pale. Highness, the corridor is not secure. We must go inside. Lyris looked at Ryan, her gaze lingering on his lips, then his eyes. The playful teasing was gone, replaced by something deeper, heavier, and far more dangerous. Be careful, Ryan, she whispered. She turned and vanished into her suite, the heavy doors sliding shut and severing the connection. Ryan was left leaning against the wall, trembling, the echo of her compassion burning in his mind hotter than any laser. Inside the suite, Lyris paced. Her skin was still humming with the residue of Ryan's emotions. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Highness, Kyr said urgently, holding out a datapad. A message, encrypted channel, source unknown, but the signature matches the leak from the homeworld. Lyris snatched the pad. Her eyes scanned the text, and her blood ran cold. Target flagged, human male, ID Rian Kalen, marked by Imperial Intelligence and Ares Corp. Status, pawn. The mechanic you collided with is now part of the plan. Whether he wants it or not, distance is safety. They saw us, Lyris whispered, horror dawning on her. The collision. They think he is an asset, or a weakness they can exploit. You must stay away from him, Kyr warned. No, Lyris said, her jaw setting. If I stay away, they will just eliminate him to tie up loose ends. If he is part of the plan, I need to know why, and I need to warn him. She threw the pad onto the couch. Arrange an inspection, Lyris commanded, her voice turning steely. The botanical gardens. Tell the station commander I require a technical escort to inspect the bio-interface of the flora. Request the mechanic from the corridor. Lyris, do it, Kyr. I dragged him into this. I will not let him be crushed by gears he does not even see. The Hollow Garden was one of the few places on Astarion that felt like a dream. It was a massive domed biosphere on the upper deck, filled with genetically modified flora from a dozen worlds. Rian waited near the entrance, feeling like a man marching to the gallows. When the request had come down, his supervisor had laughed and slapped him on the back, calling him the princess's pet mechanic. Ryan hadn't laughed. When Lyris arrived, she had ditched the ceremonial robes entirely. She wore a simple, elegant tunic and trousers of dark blue, a hood draped loosely over her hair. She looked less like an idol and more like a woman trying to disappear. Technician, she said formally as she approached, though her eyes held a spark of conspiracy. Thank you for joining me. Your Highness. Rian nodded, falling into step beside her. I was told you needed to inspect the plants? The bioluminescence, she corrected smoothly. I miss the light of my home. I wanted to see if human science could replicate it. They walked into the garden. It was twilight inside the dome. Floating ferns drifted in the air, suspended by anti-grav nodes. The flowers were massive, trumpet-shaped things that glowed with soft pulses of blue and green light. As they walked deeper into the grove, away from the prying eyes of the entrance guards, the pretense dropped. You are in danger, Lyris said quietly, not looking at him. She reached out to touch a floating petal. The flower reacted to her proximity, changing color to match her skin's glow. I figured that out when I realized who you were, Ryan said. Mechanics do not usually survive contact with royalty. It is specific, she said. My source tells me your file has been flagged. They watched our collision. They think you matter to me. Ryan stopped walking. He looked at her. Do I? Lyra stopped too. She turned to face him. The glowing plants cast strange, shifting shadows across her face. You are the only person on this station who has looked at me and seen a person, not a treaty clause, she said. Yes, you matter. The admission hung in the air. Ryan felt his heart hammer against his ribs. They resumed walking, the tension shifting from fear to something lighter, a desperate need to pretend everything was normal. So, Lyra said, gesturing to his heavy work boots, is that why you are so loud? Those boots look like they are made of lead. Ryan looked down. These are mag boots, standard issue. They keep me from floating away when the gravity fails. Unlike some people who tumble into the arms of strangers. Lyris laughed. I did not tumble. I descended with style. You just happened to be in the trajectory. You are too shiny to blend in, you know. Ryan teased, his voice lowering, becoming intimate. Even in that hood, you glow. I cannot help it, she said, looking at her hand. My emotions, they leak out. It is a flaw in the design, or a feature, depending on who you ask. They reached a secluded overlook at the edge of the dome. The transparent armorglass revealed the vast, swirling nebula outside the station. It was breathtaking, a cathedral of gas and dust. Suddenly, the air around them turned biting cold. A vent above them hissed, spewing a cloud of frosty vapor, another malfunction in the station's aging grid. Lyra shivered, her arms wrapping around herself. Her bioarmor dulled to a slate gray, a reaction to the thermal drop. Here, Ryan said. He didn't hesitate. He stripped off his leather jacket. It was old, scuffed, and lined with cheap synthetic wool. He draped it over her shoulders. Lyris pulled it tight. It didn't smell like lavender or sterile air. It smelled of engine grease, old coffee, and him. It was the most grounding scent she had ever known. Thank you, she whispered. They stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing out at the stars. The cold air made their breath puff out in little white clouds that mingled together. I am tired, Ryan said suddenly. The words felt torn out of him. I am tired of being afraid. In the war, they called us assets, weapons. Point the weapon at the enemy. When I came back, broken, I was just a malfunction, a weapon that couldn't fire anymore. He looked at her, his eyes dark and vulnerable. I look at you, he continued, and I see everyone treating you the same way. Just a shinier weapon, a prettier asset. Lyris felt tears prick her eyes. She turned to him, the oversized jacket swallowing her frame, making her look small and human. They call me the Empire's perfect body, she confessed, her voice trembling. My father, the court, they bred me, they sculpted me, every graft, every gene. I am supposed to be the pinnacle of Velian evolution, but I feel like a doll they are about to trade for a shipping lane. She looked up at him, her golden eyes swimming with unshed tears. You are the first one who asked if I liked my body, she said. No one has ever asked me that. They only care if they like it. Ryan reached out. His hand, rough and scarred, cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed the glowing line of a bio-sigil. It is a beautiful body, Ryan whispered, his voice rough with emotion. But it is not a commodity. It is your home. It belongs to you. The distance between them evaporated. The cold air, The station, the politics, it all faded. There was only the heat of her skin against his hand, the smell of ozone and desire. They recognized the same wound in each other. They were both things that wanted to be people. Lyris leaned in, her lips parted. Rian lowered his head. The pull was irresistible, a gravitational collapse of 2 stars. Whoop, whoop, whoop! The klaxon screamed through the garden, shattering the moment like a hammer through glass. Red emergency lights began to strobe. Security alert, the automated voice blared. Breach in docking bay 4. Biological containment failure. Rian pulled back instantly, the soldier taking over. His eyes scanned the perimeter. We have to go. That is near the delegation ships. Lyris looked dazed, like she had been woken from a trance. But then the training kicked in. She touched her ear, activating her comms. Kair, report. They ran toward the exit. The garden, once magical, now looked sinister in the flashing red light. By the time they reached the security checkpoint overlooking the docking bay, the chaos was visible. Smoke billowed from a transport shuttle. Security drones swarmed the air. On the monitors, the newsfeed was already running. Breaking, explosion rocks the Velian delegation transport. Human separatist group claims responsibility. No, Lyris whispered, staring at the screen. That was empty. That was a cargo hauler. It doesn't matter, Ryan said grimly. It looks like an attack. That is all they need. The smoke in the bay began to clear on the screen. The cameras zoomed in on the wreckage, showing twisted metal and scorch marks. But Lyris saw something else. Her vision, enhanced by the combat graphs she despised, zoomed in further than any human eye could. She focused on a jagged piece of debris embedded in the deck plating. It wasn't human metal. It was pulsating. It was a fragment of a bio-core, the heart of a Velian weapon system. That is not human tech, she whispered, a cold horror gripping her heart. That is Velian. My people planted that bomb. She looked at Ryan, who was scanning the crowd for threats, his hand hovering near his tool belt like it was a holster. Ryan, she said, clutching his arm. It is a lie. The whole thing is a lie. Rian looked at her, then at the burning bay. Then we are in trouble, he said, because the only people who know that are us. And on the screen above them, the ticker changed. Suspects identified. Security forces mobilizing. The trap had snapped shut. The atmosphere on Asterion Station had shifted from festive anticipation to a suffocating, paranoid dread. The air recyclers hummed with a frantic energy, as if trying to scrub the tension out of the oxygen, but the metallic tang of fear lingered in every corridor. The summit had not been cancelled, but it had mutated. Instead of galas and toasts, there were closed-door emergency sessions. The human delegation accused the Velian Empire of staging the explosion to test human defenses. The Velians accused human separatists of trying to assassinate their princess. And in the middle of it all, Rian was miserable. In a desperate bid to show unity and calm the rising panic, the station commander had ordered mixed patrols. Rian, because of his technical expertise and his unfortunate proximity to the incident, had been drafted into a security detail with a Velian shock trooper named Krog. Krog was 7 feet of armored hostility who smelled like burnt copper and looked at Ryan as if he were a stain on the floor. You walk too loud, human, Krog rumbled, his voice synthesized through a sleek black helmet. And you take up the whole hallway, Rian shot back, adjusting the strap of his toolkit. Try not to knock over any load-bearing walls. This station is held together by rust and optimism. They were patrolling the lower maintenance levels, checking for secondary devices. Rian hated it, Every shadow looked like a saboteur. Every flickering light triggered a muscle memory of the war. He kept his hand near the heavy wrench on his belt, his eyes darting from vent to vent. He wasn't just looking for bombs. He was looking for her. He hadn't seen Lyris since the garden, since the moment they had almost kissed under the fake stars. The memory of her, the heat of her skin, the raw vulnerability in her golden eyes burned in his mind like a fever. He told himself it was better this way. She was royalty, he was a mechanic. Their worlds had touched for a second, created a spark, and now they were drifting back to their respective orbits. But he couldn't stop thinking about the fear he had felt radiating from her. High above, in the sterile luxury of the Velian flagship, Princess Lyris was doing something forbidden. She was in her private biolab, a small, sealed room usually reserved for maintaining her own genetic modifications. On the table before her sat the jagged piece of debris she had recovered from the docking bay. To the naked eye, it looked like a fragment of a human-made combustion engine, scorched steel and wiring. But Lyris was not looking with naked eyes. She had activated her spectral vision, a modification that allowed her to see biological signatures. Under her gaze, the metal dissolved. "Computer," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Analyze the core composition." The ship's AI responded in a soft chime. "Analysis complete. The outer shell is standard ferrous alloy, human manufacture. The inner core is organic. Identify, Velian biolattice. Mark IV. Lyris gripped the edge of the table. Mark IV. That was military grade. It was the kind of living tissue used in the Empire's heavy torpedoes. "It was us," she murmured to the empty room. Someone had taken a piece of Velian weaponry, wrapped it in human scrap metal, and detonated it to look like a separatist attack. This wasn't just a rogue actor. This required access to the Imperial Armory. It required high-level clearance. She needed to tell someone, but who? Her father was light years away. Her attendants were loyal but powerless. She thought of Lord Cale Viron. He was the admiral of the fleet. He was her betrothed. He was the man charged with her safety. If there was a traitor in the ranks, surely Cale would want to know. Lyris swept the debris into a containment box and sealed it. She checked her reflection in the chrome wall. She looked composed, regal. Every inch the princess. Inside, she was screaming. She found Lord Cale in his strategy room aboard the flagship. He was standing over a holographic map of the sector, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a striking man, tall and broad, with silver hair and eyes that were a shade of blue so pale they looked like ice. "Lyris," he said, turning as she entered. His smile was smooth, practiced. "You should be resting. The attack, it has shaken everyone." "I am not shaken, Cale," she said, placing the box on the map table. "I am suspicious." He raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious?" "I analyzed the debris from the blast," she said, her voice steady. "It was a false flag. The core was Velian biotech disguised as human scrap. Someone on this ship, or in your fleet, ordered that explosion." She waited for his outrage. She waited for him to call security, to lock down the ship, to demand answers. Instead, Cale sighed. It was the sound a parent makes at a tired child. "Lyris," he said softly, walking around the table. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool, dry, and lifeless compared to the heat she had felt from Ryan. "You have a beautiful intensity. I have always admired that about you." "Did you hear me?" She pulled her hand away. "This is treason. It is an act of war." "It is politics," Cale corrected, his voice dropping an octave. You have been under a great deal of stress. The modifications, they can make the mind fragile. Paranoia is a known side effect of the empathy graphs. Lyris took a step back, her stomach churning. Do not gaslight me, Kale. I know what I saw. And I know what is best for the Empire, he said, stepping into her personal space. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly. It wasn't a caress. It was a claim. You are the symbol, Lyris. You shine. You inspire. Leave the ugly work, the strategies, the hard choices to men who are built for it. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. Do not go looking for shadows, he whispered. You might find that they bite. Go back to your quarters. Prepare for the signing. Let me handle the security. Lyris stared at him. She saw the cold ambition in his eyes. She felt, through her implant, not concern but a smug, oily satisfaction. He knew. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was protecting the plot. As you wish, Lord Admiral, she said, her voice icy. She turned and walked out, keeping her back straight. But the moment the doors hissed shut behind her, she broke into a run. She had no allies here. The ship was a trap. She needed the mechanic. Ryan was deep in the bowels of Sector 9, trying to ignore Krog, who was currently dismantling a vending machine that had looked at him wrong. His comms beeped, a text-only message. Station schematics required. Level 4, reactor access. Urgent. L. Ryan stared at the screen. Level 4 was a ghost town. It was the old reactor core, deafeningly loud and hot. I have to check a flux capacitor in the secondary grid. Ryan lied smoothly to Krog. It is a one-man squeeze. You stay here and secure the perimeter. Krog grunted, ripping a bag of chips from the ruin of the machine. Do not take long, human. Ryan moved fast. He slid down the gravity ladders, bypassing 2 checkpoints with codes he wasn't supposed to have. When he reached the reactor access, the noise was a physical weight. The massive turbines thrummed with a bass note that rattled his teeth. The lighting was dim, emergency orange strips casting long, jagged shadows. She was waiting for him in the shadow of a cooling tower. She wore a dark cloak over a simple jumpsuit, her face hidden. But Ryan knew her stance. He knew the way she held herself, like a coiled spring. Princess, Ryan said, stepping out of the gloom. Lyris turned. She pushed back her hood. Her face was pale, the glowing sigils on her skin pulsing with a frantic, erratic rhythm. They did it, she said, no preamble. My people. The explosion was a Velian weapon disguised as human tech. I showed Kale. He dismissed me. He practically told me to go back to my room and look pretty while he starts a war. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. If the Admiral is involved, Lyris, that means the fleet is compromised. If we expose this, they will kill us. You realize that? This isn't fixing a leaky pipe. This is treason. I know, she shouted, her voice cracking over the roar of the reactors. She stepped closer, invading his space. Do you think I don't know? I am the one they are using as the detonator. But who else can I trust? The humans think I am the enemy. My own people think I am a prop. You are the only one who is real. I am nobody, Ryan yelled back, fear spiking in his chest. I am a grease monkey with PTSD. I can't save an empire. I don't need you to save the empire. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket, yanking him down to her level. I need you to help me save myself. The distance between them vanished. The anger, the fear, the desperation, it all collided. And Lyris's implant flared. Ryan felt it hit him like a physical wave. He felt her terror, a cold, sharp needle in the gut. He felt her rage at being used, at being silenced, and beneath it all, he felt a longing so deep it knocked the wind out of him, a longing for him, for his hands, for his steadiness. And Lyris felt him. She felt his panic, the soldier's instinct to run, warring with a fierce, burning protectiveness. She felt the way he looked at her, not as a princess, but as a woman he wanted to wrap in his jacket and shield from the universe. The feedback loop spiraled. Their breath hitched. Ryan's hands found her waist, gripping hard, grounding her, her fingers fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Lyris, he choked out. They stared at each other, eyes wide, pupils blown. The air around them crackled with bioelectric energy and raw human heat. They leaned in. Their lips were millimeters apart. Ryan could taste her breath, sweet and ozone. Then, a steam valve hissed loudly above them, venting pressure with a shriek. They jerked back as if they had been electrocuted. Ryan stumbled against a pipe. Lyris backed into the railing. They stood there, chests heaving, staring at each other in shock. Then, Ryan let out a short, hysterical laugh. "We are terrible at this," he wheezed. "We are discussing treason and impending death, and all I can think about is kissing you." Lyris let out a shaky breath, a smile breaking through her fear. "It is dangerously distracting. You are a terrible influence on my royal composure, mechanic." "Good," Ryan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Composure gets you killed. Instinct keeps you alive." He straightened up, the soldier mode clicking back into place. "Okay, if Kale is behind this, he didn't trigger the bomb himself. Admirals don't push buttons. They have lackeys. Someone on this station activated that core remotely. If we can find the signal source, we can trace it back to the operator." Lyris nodded, her eyes sharpening. "The power logs. Activating a biocore requires a massive energy surge to wake the tissue. It would show up on the grid." "Exactly." Ryan grinned, a sharp, dangerous grin. "But we can't access those logs from here. We need to go down, to the Undercity." "The Undercity?" Lyris asked. "The illegal marketplace on the lower decks," Ryan said. "That is where the data brokers live. And if someone smuggled a Velian weapon onto this station, that is where they moved it through." The journey to the Undercity was a descent into hell, but Lyris found she preferred it to the sterile heaven of her ship. They had to bypass the main lifts to avoid the patrols. Ryan led her through the zero-gravity maintenance shafts that ran like arteries through the station's spine. Floating in the dark, weightless. They moved hand over hand along the guide rails. "Don't look down," Ryan warned as they drifted over a chasm that dropped into the reactor pit. "I have spent my whole life looking down from towers," Lyris whispered, kicking off a bulkhead and gliding past him. "I prefer looking up." They emerged into the Undercity through a rusted service hatch. The smell hit them first. Spices, unwashed bodies, burning chemicals, and fried food. The lighting was neon and erratic. The crowd was a dense river of smugglers, outcasts, and criminals from a dozen species. "Stay close," Ryan muttered, "and pull your hood up. If anyone asks, you are... Actually, let me do the talking." "I can handle myself," Lyris said, though she tucked her hands into her sleeves to hide the glowing cuffs of her biosuit. They navigated the maze of stalls until they found a booth tucked behind a wall of hanging synth leather. A multi-armed alien with cybernetic eyes sat behind a console. "Vex," Ryan said, leaning on the counter. The alien blinked his 3 mechanical eyes. "Ryan, you owe me 50 credits. I will pay you double if you give me the access logs for the station's power grid, specifically Sector 4, 2 hours ago." Vex laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "That is classified, soldier boy. Military-grade encryption, why do you want it?" Rian leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Because someone blew up my favorite coffee shop near the docking bay, and I want to know who left the stove on. Vex hesitated. He looked at Ryan, then his gaze slid to Lyris, who was standing imperiously behind him. And who is the shiny one? Vex asked. Lyris stepped forward. She didn't cower. She lowered her hood just enough to show the arrogant tilt of her chin and the dangerous glint in her eyes. She channeled every ounce of the haughty, bored noblewoman she had been trained to be. I am the one paying the bill, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. And I do not like to wait. My time is worth more than your life, data monger. She slapped a credit chip onto the counter, one she had lifted from Kale's strategy room. It was an Imperial Platinum marker. Unlimited funds. Vex's eyes widened. He snatched the chip. Right away, my lady. Apologies. He typed furiously. A moment later, he slid a data spike across the counter. Power spike confirmed. Origin point was a terminal in the cargo sector. But, hey, this signature. It is encrypted with a double helix key. That is Velian military code. We know, Ryan said, grabbing the spike. Wait. Vex squinted at them. A human mechanic and a Velian highborn, sneaking around the Undercity, buying illegal logs? He grinned, exposing a row of metal teeth. I have privacy pods in the back. Soundproof, clean sheets, very discreet for interspecies negotiations. Ryan flushed bright red. It is not like that. We are working, Lyris said, though her cheeks turned a shade of violet. Sure. Vex winked. We work. That is what they all say. Enjoy the work, kids. They hurried away from the stall, Rian grumbling under his breath while Lyris fought back a mortified giggle. They found a quiet corner behind a stack of shipping crates to analyze the data. Rian slotted the spike into his datapad. Okay, Rian said, scrolling through the code. Here it is, the command signal. It was routed through a shell company called Red Sun Imports. But look at the routing path, he pointed to the screen. It bounced off a comm buoy in the Velian home system, Lyris said, reading the code. And then back to a private server owned by Ares Corp. Ares Corp, Rian spat. Human arms dealers. They made the rifles that killed my squad. And the Velian expansionists, Lyris realized. They are working together. The Rekindling. That is the project name in the file header. They want another war, Rian said, the reality settling on him like a stone. Ares sells the weapons. Viren gets the glory of conquest. And we are all just meat for the grinder. He looked at Lyris. We have the proof, he said. But we have to get this to the summit. We have to broadcast it before the signing ceremony. Ryan, Lyris said softly. Once we do this, there is no going back. You will be a target forever. Rian looked at the data, then at her. He thought about the peace he had pretended to want, the safe, quiet life of a mechanic who didn't care. I can't go back anyway, he said. I stopped being safe the minute I caught you. Suddenly, a spotlight swept over them. Halt! A voice amplified by speakers boomed from above. By order of the Imperial Guard, halt! They looked up. A patrol drone hovered 20 feet up. Its sensors locked on Lyris. Run, Ryan said. They bolted. They sprinted through the twisted alleys of the Undercity, dodging startled shoppers and crashing through stalls. The drone shrieked, firing stun bolts that sizzled against the metal walls. This way! Ryan grabbed her hand, dragging her toward a row of bulk storage units. They are tracking my biosignature, Lyris gasped. Not if we mask it, Ryan shouted. He yanked open the door of a small hazardous materials pod. It was tiny, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. In! Now! They dove inside. Rian slammed the door and hit the magnetic lock just as the drone zoomed past. The pod was pitch black. It was silent, save for their ragged breathing. They were pressed together, body to body. There was nowhere to move. Ryan's back was against the cold metal door. Lyris was pressed into him, her legs tangled with his. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving them trembling. "Are they gone?" Lyris whispered. Her voice was right at his ear. "I think so," Ryan breathed. "Wait." The silence stretched. The heat in the small space rose. Rian could feel every curve of her body against his. He could feel the hard ridges of her bio-armor and the softness of the silk beneath. "Ryan," Lyris said, her voice small and shaky. "I am scared." "I know," he said. "Me too." "No," she said. "Not of dying. I am scared. That even if we survive this, I will never be free. My father. Kale, they own me. My blood is patented. My skin is a map. I am just a thing to them." She buried her face in his neck. Rian felt a wetness there. Tears. "I am just a weapon," she sobbed quietly. "That is all I am." Rian's heart broke. He moved his hands, bringing them up to cup her face. He lifted her head until he could see the faint glow of her eyes in the darkness. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce and low. "You are not a weapon. You are not a map. You are Lyris. You are the woman who laughs at bad jokes and hates itchy dresses and feels too much." His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. "I see you," he promised. "I see you." Lyris let out a shuddering breath. She leaned into his touch, seeking it like sunlight. "Show me," she whispered. She closed the tiny distance between them. The kiss was not like the one they had almost shared earlier. It wasn't hesitant. It was a collision. Rian kissed her with all the hunger of a man who had been starving for years. Lyris kissed him back with a desperate, fiery need to be known, to be felt, to be real. It was messy and unpracticed and perfect. Her hands tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, crushing her to him. For a moment, in that cramped, dark metal box, the war didn't exist. The conspiracy didn't exist. There was only the taste of her, the heat of her, the absolute, undeniable truth of them. They broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting against each other. "Wow," Ryan breathed. "Yes," Lyris agreed, her voice husky. "Wow." Suddenly the pod door hissed. Light flooded in, blinding them. They froze, still wrapped in each other's arms, looking out like deer caught in headlights. Floating in front of the open door was a small, rusty maintenance drone with a singular blue eye. "Alert!" The drone's speaker crackled in a bored, monotonous voice. "Biological entanglement detected in unauthorized storage space. Please refrain from mating rituals in the Class C chemical locker. It is unsanitary." Rian and Lyris stared at the drone. Then they looked at each other. Rian started to laugh. He couldn't help it. Lyris buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with mirth. "We should go," Rian managed to say, grabbing her hand again. "Before he writes us up for a hygiene violation." They scrambled out of the pod, hand in hand, running back into the shadows. The danger was still all around them. The hunters were closing in, but something had changed. They weren't just running away anymore. They were running together. The data stream scrolled across the terminal screen in a waterfall of jagged green text, casting a sick, artificial light over Lyris's face. They were holed up in a decommissioned medical bay in Sector 12, a place Ryan had scavenged for parts months ago. It smelled of antiseptic and dust, a sharp contrast to the lavender-scented prisons of the Velian flagship. Rian stood by the door, watching the corridor on a cracked monitor, his hand resting near the heavy wrench on his belt. But his eyes kept drifting back to Lyris. She had not moved for 10 minutes. She was staring at the decrypted files they had pulled from the Ares Corp server. Her posture, usually so regal and fluid, was rigid, as if her spine had turned to stone. "Lyris?" Ryan asked softly. She did not answer. She simply reached out and tapped a specific file. The holographic display expanded, showing a rotating 3D schematic of a Velian skeletal structure. It was her. "Look at the thoracic cavity," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, drained of all inflection. "Do you see the node attached to the primary cardiac rhythm driver?" Ryan stepped closer, squinting at the complex biology. "I see it. It looks like a pacemaker." "It is a kinetic discharge regulator," Lyris said. "Military grade, usually installed in heavy assault drones to overload their cores if they are captured." She turned to him. Her golden eyes were dry, but they burned with a cold, nuclear fury. "It is a bomb. Ryan, I am not just the target of the assassination, I am the weapon." Rian felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "The plan," she said, gesturing to the damning text. "They are not going to shoot me. They are going to transmit a kill code during the ceremony. This node will override my biofield, causing a catastrophic energy surge. To the cameras, it will look like a human terrorist hacked my suit and overloaded it. I will detonate. I will take out the entire podium, my father's delegates, the Earth president, everyone." She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "A false flag operation to start a galactic war. And the trigger is my own heart." "We have to get that thing out of you," Ryan said, panic rising in his chest. "I can find a surgeon, a back alley doc in the Undercity. It is woven into my nervous system." Lyris cut him off. "If you try to remove it, it kills me. If the code is sent, it kills me. I was dead the moment I was born. Ryan, my father knew. He must have known. You do not install a self-destruct mechanism in an infant without the Emperor's seal." She stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back. "I need air," she gasped. "I need to see the sky." They found an observation dome on the upper maintenance deck. It was a small blister of armor-glass protruding from the station's hull, intended for inspecting the solar arrays. It was freezing cold and utterly silent. Outside, the galaxy sprawled in a chaotic tapestry of violet gas and burning white stars. Inside, the only sound was the harsh rasp of Lyris's breathing. She walked to the center of the room and began to unbuckle her tunic. "Lyris," Rian said, turning away to give her privacy. "You don't have to. Look at me," she commanded. The voice was not the princess. It was the raw cry of a woman breaking apart. Rian turned back. She had stripped off the outer layers of her disguise and the heavy ceremonial armor pieces she usually wore beneath. She stood before him in a thin, skin-tight underlayer that left her arms, shoulders, and back exposed. Without the dampeners of her royal regalia, her bioluminescence was blinding, complex. Swirling patterns of light pulsed along her skin, tracing the lines of her lymphatic system and her nerves. They flared bright blue, then angry violet, then a sick, dull gray. "Look," she hissed, pointing to a cluster of glowing scars near her collarbone. "This is where they grafted the empathy node so I could charm diplomats. And here," she pointed to the ridges along her spine, "where they reinforced the bone so I could wear 50 pounds of gold without collapsing. And here," she placed her hand over her heart, where a faint, sinister red pulse beat beneath the skin, "is where they put the bomb." She was trembling, her entire body vibrating with rage and shame. They designed this body to charm, to distract, to explode, she whispered. They never cared about the person inside. I am just a very expensive piece of ammunition. Ryan looked at her. He saw the alien geometry of her markings, the terrified beat of her pulse, the sheer, overwhelming power contained in her fragile form. He did not see a weapon. He walked toward her. He did not rush. He moved with the deliberate, gentle quietness he used when approaching a frightened animal or a volatile engine. "Ryan, stay back," she warned, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I am dangerous. I am a grenade waiting for the pin to be pulled." "No," Ryan said. He stopped inches from her. He reached out his hand. His fingers were rough, stained with oil and old scars, shaking slightly. He touched her arm. He traced a line of glowing violet light that ran from her shoulder to her elbow. He didn't touch her like a man claiming possession. He touched her like a pilgrim touching a relic. He touched her like she was the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. "This is not a fuse," Ryan murmured. His eyes locked on the light moving under her skin. "And this is not a weapon casing." He looked up, meeting her tear-filled golden eyes. "This is the home of the woman who made me want to live again." Lyris let out a sob that seemed to tear her throat. The anger drained out of her, leaving a vast, hollow ache. "I am so tired, Ryan," she wept. "I am so tired of being used." "I know," he whispered. He stepped in and wrapped his arms around her. It was a fierce embrace. He held her as if he could physically hold her pieces together, as if his own body could act as a shield against the signal that wanted to destroy her. Lyris collapsed against him, her knees giving way, her hands clutching at the back of his jacket, fisting in the fabric until her knuckles turned white. The contact was electric. Her skin was hot, feverish against his. His body was solid, a wall of muscle and bone that smelled of safety. The closeness sparked a sudden, violent tempest. The grief and the fear twisted, transforming into a desperate, searing need. Lyris lifted her head. Ryan looked down. Their breathing became ragged. Ryan's hands slid from her back to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Lyris gasped, the sound sharp in the quiet dome. She could feel the hard line of his body against hers. She wanted him. She wanted to lose herself in him, to let the physical sensation drown out the political horror, to be touched not as a princess or a bomb, but as a woman. They teetered on the edge. Ryan's hand moved up to tangle in her hair, tilting her head back. His lips hovered over hers, hungry and desperate. It would be so easy to fall to the floor and to forget the treaty, to burn together in the dark. But Ryan stopped. He froze, his forehead resting against hers, his breath hitching. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to take what they both wanted. "Ryan," she whispered, a plea. "If we do this now," Ryan rasped, his voice rough with restraint, "it is just hiding. It is just running away." He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark with desire, but clear. "I want you," he said, the truth of it hitting her like a physical blow. "God, Lyris, I want you, but not like this. Not because we are scared. Not because we are trying to forget." Lyris trembled. She realized he was right. They were using desire as an anesthetic. She let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned her forehead against his chest. She didn't try to kiss him again. She just held him. And then she cried. She cried for the childhood she never had. She cried for the bomb in her chest. And Ryan held her through it all, stroking her hair, anchoring her to the world. In that refusal, in that choice to stand in the pain rather than escape it, the bond between them shifted. It hardened. It became unbreakable. "Okay," Lyris whispered after a long time. wiping her face. Okay, we do not run. No, Ryan said, stepping back and holding her shoulders. We fight. We use it against them, Ryan said. They were back in the medical bay. The mood transformed from despair to a frantic, focused energy. The kill code works by overloading the bio node, Ryan explained, pointing to the schematic. It sends a massive voltage spike through your nervous system. But your system is designed to handle energy. That is what the empathy graphs do. They process bioelectric signals. So? Lyris asked, tying her hair back. So, we reroute it, Ryan said. We create a bypass. When the signal hits, instead of letting it detonate the core, we channel it through your empathy implants and project it outward. Like a feedback loop, Lyris realized. I can vent the energy as light and heat. But Ryan, I cannot control that kind of surge alone. My conscious mind will be overwhelmed by the pain. I will black out, and then I will explode anyway. You won't be alone, Ryan said. He held up a modification tool and a neural headset he had jury-rigged from spare parts. I will be linked to you. I can monitor the flow. I can act as your external regulator. I will tell you when to hold and when to vent. You would be linking your mind to a dying star, Lyris warned. If I surge, it could fry your brain. Ryan shrugged, a ghost of his old sarcasm returning. I have survived Velian plasma fire and cafeteria synth loaf. I think I can handle a little princess power. The next 6 hours were a blur of training and terror. They found an isolated cargo chamber with heavy shielding to test the connection. Ryan attached sensors to Lyris's temples and arms, then donned the headset. Okay, Ryan said. I am going to simulate a low-level voltage spike. Ready? Do it. Ryan keyed the command. Lyris gasped. Her skin flared bright white. The air in the room crackled with static. Hold it, Ryan shouted, his own teeth gritting as he felt a ghost echo of her sensation through the link. Channel it to your hands, Lyris grit her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. I can't. Yes, you can. Look at me. She locked eyes with him. The connection stabilized. The blinding white light flowed down her arms and discharged from her fingertips in a harmless shower of sparks that scorched the floor. Lyris collapsed, panting. That was 5% power, Ryan said, wiping his brow. Great, Lyris wheezed. Only 95% more to go. There were failures. Once, a surge caused a gravity anomaly that sent them both tumbling across the room. They ended up in a heap of tangled limbs and cables. Ryan hovering 2 feet off the ground while Lyris held onto his ankle to keep him from hitting the ceiling. You are heavier than you look, she teased, pulling him down as the gravity normalized. And you are shocking me, Ryan laughed, rubbing a spot on his arm where her skin had zapped him. Literally, my hair is standing up. Lyris reached out and smoothed his hair down, her touch tender. Better? Much, Ryan said softly. Amid the wires and the danger, they built a language. A touch on the wrist meant stabilize. A look meant I am with you. They shared soft, fleeting kisses between tests, not the desperate hunger of the observation dome, but gentle, reassuring seals on their partnership. While they worked in the shadows, the station above them was spiraling toward the edge. The political stakes were escalating. The treaty ceremony was only hours away. Lord Cale Viren was playing his part perfectly. He appeared at every press briefing, standing tall and grave. He spoke of unity and vigilance. Ryan watched a feed from the public concourse. Cale was there, and Lyris, or rather, a holographic stand-in that the palace had clearly deployed to cover her absence, was beside him. Cale placed his hand on the hologram's shoulder. He loomed over her. It was a possessive, dominating gesture. He looked like a man showing off a prize dog. "He thinks he owns you," Ryan growled. "He thinks he owns the future," Lyris corrected, watching the screen with cold eyes. On the human side, it was no better. The hardliners were broadcasting on all frequencies. "Why should we trust them?" a human general shouted on the newsfeed. "They send us their witch princess with her alien body and her alien appetites. They want to breed us out of existence." Ryan flinched. Alien appetites. He remembered using words like that. He remembered sitting in barracks, joking about the bugs and the glowskins. He remembered thinking that Velians were fundamentally wrong, that their biology was a perversion. Now those words felt like a knife in his gut. "Ryan?" Lyris asked, sensing his distress through their lingering connection. "I used to listen to men like that," Ryan admitted, his voice low. "I used to be a man like that. And now?" "Now," Ryan said, looking at her, "I think they are the ones who are blind." "I have to call him," Lyris said. "Your father?" "If there is even a 1% chance that he does not know, that Cale acted alone, I have to know." She set up a secure tight beam link, using the codes she had stolen from the flagship. The hologram flickered to life. The Emperor of the Velian Empire sat on his obsidian throne. He was ancient. His own biomarkings faded to a dull, majestic silver. "Lyris," the Emperor said. His voice was not warm. It was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. "You are not in your quarters. Cale tells me you are unwell." "I am not unwell, Father," Lyris said, standing tall. "I am a bomb." The Emperor did not blink. He did not gasp. He simply sat there, an immovable object. "I found the node, Father. Protocol 99, the remote detonation." "It is a contingency," the Emperor said, "for the preservation of the state." Lyris felt something inside her shatter. The last tiny fragment of the little girl who wanted her father's love turned to dust. "I am your daughter," she whispered. "You are the heir," the Emperor corrected. "The Empire requires sacrifice. If your death ensures the destruction of our enemies and the unification of our people, it is a noble end. Love is a luxury for lesser beings. Lyris, we are history." "No," Lyris said, her voice trembling with a new, cold strength. "You are history. I am the future." She cut the feed. She stood in the silence, staring at the empty air. "He knows," she said. "He signed the order." Rian walked over to her. He didn't say anything. He just stood beside her, a silent sentinel. "I feel," Lyris started, then stopped. "I feel like I have no skin, like I am flayed open." "I know the feeling," Rian said. He sat down on a crate, looking at his hands. "When I was 20, I was a sniper," Ryan said. "I was good at it. My commanding officer told me I was a good weapon. That was the highest compliment he could give. I killed a Velian officer on Mars. I watched him die through my scope, and I felt proud." He looked up at her. "Then my squad got hit. I broke. I couldn't hold a rifle anymore because my hands shook too much. And the moment I stopped being a good weapon, they threw me away. They didn't care about Ryan. They cared about the function I performed." He stood up and took her hands. "That is why wanting you scared me," he confessed. "Because for a long time, I thought the only way to be safe was to be numb, to be a machine. Loving you, wanting you, it felt like stepping back into the violence. It felt like opening the wound." "And now?" Lyris asked. "Now I realize that the wound is where the light gets in," Ryan said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Desire isn't violence, Lyris. It is healing. It is the opposite of what they did to us. They used our bodies for death. We are choosing to use them for love, for life. Lyris squeezed his hands. The glow of her skin turned a soft, steady gold. We go together, she said. We go together. Ryan agreed. As people, not property. The hour had come. The grand hall of Asterion Station was a cavernous space of glass and steel, draped in the banners of Earth and the Velian Empire. Thousands of dignitaries filled the seats. Millions more watched via the feeds. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, stood the Emperor's hologram, the Earth President, and Lord Kael Viron. Ryan and Lyris stood at the back service entrance. Lyris was dressed in her ceremonial gown, but she had altered it. She had ripped the heavy, restrictive sleeves off, leaving her arms bare. The glowing patterns on her skin were visible, defiant. Ryan wore his best mechanic's jumpsuit, clean and pressed, with a comms headset around his neck and a datapad strapped to his wrist. "Are you ready?" Ryan asked. Lyris took a deep breath. She could feel the dormant node in her chest, a sleeping dragon waiting to wake up. "No," she said honestly, "but I am going anyway." "Stay close to the empathic link," Ryan reminded her. "If you feel the surge, find my voice. Anchor to me. Always," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand. It was a breach of protocol. A princess did not hold hands with a mechanic. She didn't care. The doors hissed open. The roar of the crowd washed over them. They stepped into the light. The grand hall of Asterion Station was a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended against the infinite backdrop of the void. For the signing of the Treaty of Solvara, the station authorities had spared no expense. Banners of deep Velian indigo and stark Terran blue hung from the vaulted ceiling, rippling in the artificial currents of the air cyclers. Thousands of delegates filled the amphitheater seating, a sea of formal uniforms, silk robes, and the flashing lights of media drones that buzzed overhead like a swarm of inquisitive hornets. To the galaxy, this was a moment of triumph. To Ryan, hidden behind a fake maintenance panel in the audio-visual control booth, it looked like the inside of a blast furnace. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard of his modified deck. He was not wearing his mechanic's grease-stained coveralls today. He wore a stolen technician's uniform, crisp and gray, blending into the background. But around his neck sat the neural headset, and taped to his wrist was the interface unit that connected him directly to the bio node in Lyris's chest. "Signal check," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd outside the booth. "I can hear you," Lyris's voice echoed in his mind, clear and terrified. "It is loud. Ryan, there are so many eyes." Ryan looked up at the main monitor. Lyris stood on the central dais, flanked by the Earth President and Lord Kael Viron. She was a vision of unearthly beauty, her arms bare, her skin pulsing with a soft, rhythmic golden light. To the audience, she was the jewel of the Empire. To Ryan, she was a woman standing on a landmine. "Focus on my voice," Ryan murmured, adjusting the gain on the neural link. "Ignore the eyes. You are just in the garden, just looking at the stars." Lord Kael is smiling, Lyris thought back, the sensation of her revulsion traveling down the wire and making Ryan shiver. He knows. He is waiting for the fireworks. The ceremony began. The Earth President, a heavy-set man with a practiced baritone, stepped to the podium to deliver a speech about brotherhood and new horizons. It was hollow, scripted nonsense. Ryan watched the data streams on his deck. He was monitoring the station's local network, watching for the spike, the command code that would trigger the assassination. "We stand today at the precipice of history," the president boomed, leaving behind the scars of the past. "Incoming," Rian hissed. "I have a packet injection in the local grid. Source is encrypted. It is the signal." On the dais, Lyris stiffened. It did not start with a sound. It started with fire. Deep inside her chest, the dormant military node woke up. It was a sensation of pure, white-hot agony, as if a star had ignited between her ribs. The muscles in her back locked rigid, her vision fractured into shards of static. The command was simple and absolute. "Overload. Detonate." "Ryan!" she screamed internally, the mental shout nearly deafening him. "I have you!" Ryan shouted back, his hands blurring on the console. "Don't fight it. You cannot stop the surge. You have to redirect it. Anchor to me." Lyris gasped audibly on the stage. The crowd murmured, mistaking her convulsion for emotion. Lord Kale took a half-step back, his face twisting into a mask of mock concern, his hand hovering near his sidearm. He was ready to put her down the moment she flared. "Breathe," Ryan commanded, his voice a lifeline in the chaos of her mind. "Remember the observation deck. Remember the cold glass. Remember the kiss. Channel the energy through the empathy graphs. Push it out." Lyris clenched her fists. The pain was blinding. Her heart hammered against the inhibitor node, trying to tear itself apart. She felt the destructive energy building, a tsunami of heat that wanted to consume her. She grabbed onto Ryan's voice. She visualized his face, the rough texture of his jacket, the steady strength of his hands. "I am here," she whispered. She shoved the energy outward. Instead of exploding, her body erupted in light. A shockwave of luminescence blasted from her skin. It was not the soft glow of the garden. It was a blinding, iridescent aurora of violet, gold, and searing white. The light spiraled up from the dais, hitting the glass ceiling of the hall and refracting into a million rainbows. The crowd gasped in unison. A hush fell over the hall. They thought it was a performance, a Velian ceremonial display of power and beauty. "Beautiful," a commentator whispered on the media feed. "Absolutely stunning." But Ryan saw the truth. He saw the red line warnings on Lyris's biometrics. She was burning alive. "Hold it," Ryan gritted out, feeling a phantom echo of her burning skin on his own arms. "Now! Lyris, the payload! While the channel is open, force the data out." Lyris threw her head back, her eyes glowing like twin suns. She reached into the depths of her memory banks, where Ryan had uploaded the decrypted files. She grabbed the evidence, the audio logs, the medical schematics, the treasonous communications, and she hurled them into the station's broadcast system. "Look at me," she cried out, her voice amplified by the station's speakers, distorted by the energy surging through her throat. "Look at what they made me." The massive holographic screens that lined the hall, which had been displaying the flags of the two nations, flickered and died. A second later, they rebooted. But they were not showing flags. They were showing a grainy video recording. It was Lord Kale Viren, standing in the shadows of a cargo bay, shaking hands with a human executive from Ares Corp. "The princess is the catalyst." Kale's recorded voice boomed through the hall, echoing off the glass walls. "We modify the bio node. We trigger it during the signing when she detonates. We blame the human radicals. The war restarts by sunset." The silence in the hall was absolute. It was the silence of 5,000 people realizing they were standing in a trap. Then, the screen shifted to a medical log. A rotating schematic of Lyris's body appeared, with the bomb in her chest highlighted in angry red. The text scrolling beside it read, "Subject, Lyris. Classification, Expendable symbol. Status. Armed. Chaos erupted. It was an explosion of noise. Delegates were screaming. Chairs were overturned. The media drones went into a frenzy, swirling down to get a closer look at the dais. On the stage, Lord Kale's face went pale, then purple with rage. The mask of the diplomat fell away, revealing the butcher beneath. "Cut the feed," he roared at the control booth. "She is compromised. The humans have hacked her." He drew his sidearm, a heavy Velian particle pistol. "She is overloading," Kale shouted, aiming the weapon at Lyrus's head. "I have to neutralize the threat." "No!" Ryan screamed. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He ripped the headset off, grabbed his modified datapad, and kicked open the door of the control booth. He sprinted onto the catwalk overlooking the hall. He was 40 feet above the dais, too far to reach her, too far to stop a bullet. But he controlled the station. "Gravity!" Ryan snarled, sliding his thumb across the control interface on his wrist. "Localize, dais, invert." The gravity generators under the stage groaned and reversed polarity. Lord Kale, his finger tightening on the trigger, was suddenly yanked upward. He flailed, weightless, his shot going wide and scorching a banner hanging from the ceiling. The Earth President, shouting in confusion, floated upward with him. Ryan vaulted over the railing. He fell through the air, timing his descent. As he crossed the threshold of the localized gravity field, he slammed into Lord Kale in midair. It was a messy, brutal collision. Ryan wasn't a martial artist. He was a brawler. He wrapped his arms around the Admiral's waist and drove him down as the gravity fluctuated again. They slammed hard onto a floating ceremonial platform. The pistol skittered away across the floor. Kale roared, backhanding Ryan across the face. The blow was enhanced by Kale's own combat graphs. It felt like being hit with a steel pipe. Ryan tasted blood, his vision swimming, but he scrambled back up. "You dirt-born peasant!" Kale spat, scrambling for the gun. "Stay down!" Ryan shouted, tackling him again. On the dais below, the Imperial Guards were confused. Their commander was fighting a mechanic. Their princess was glowing like a supernova. "Secure the target!" a guard captain shouted, pointing his rifle at Lyrus. Lyrus was still fighting the internal fire. The node was screaming, demanding to release its full destructive potential. She saw the guards raising their weapons. "No!" she gasped. She didn't surrender. She didn't hide. She extended her hand. Ryan said, "Vent the energy," she whispered. She unleashed a concentrated pulse of heat toward the guards. It wasn't a killing strike. It was a wave of pure thermal intensity. The rifles in the guards' hands instantly glowed cherry red. The metal softened, barrels drooping, internal power cells fusing. The guards dropped the useless weapons with cries of pain, shaking their scorched hands. Ryan was losing the fight on the platform. Kale had him pinned, his hands around Ryan's throat, squeezing with crushing force. "I will kill you," Kale hissed, his eyes manic. "And then I will kill her, and history will write what I tell it to write." Ryan couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in his eyes. He scrabbled for his tool belt, his fingers grazing the handle of his heavy wrench. He swung it. A sickening crack echoed as the wrench connected with Kale's armor, right at the shoulder joint. Kale yelled and loosened his grip. Ryan kicked him off, gasping for air. He looked down at the dais. One of the guards, a loyalist to Kale's faction, had drawn a backup kinetic pistol, old tech, immune to the heat pulse. He was aiming at Lyrus's back. "Lyrus!" Ryan screamed. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself from the floating platform, diving through the air just as the guard fired. The bullet was meant for her heart. It hit Ryan in the shoulder. The impact spun him around in midair. He crashed onto the stage, sliding to a halt at Lyrus's feet. Time seemed to stop. The noise of the crowd faded into a dull roar. The lights blurred. Lyris felt the impact before she saw it. The empathic link, still active, transmitted a sudden sharp spike of agony that tore through her chest. It wasn't her pain, it was his. She spun around. Ryan! The light around her body died down, the rage vanishing, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. She fell to her knees beside him. Blood was spreading across the gray fabric of his technician's uniform, dark and glossy under the stage lights. He was clutching his shoulder, his face pale, his teeth gritted in pain. "Hey!" Ryan wheezed, looking up at her. I think I broke my fall with my collarbone." Lyris's hands hovered over the wound, glowing with a soft, frantic amber light. She was trembling. "You idiot," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "You absolute idiot, you jumped." "Technically," Ryan coughed, wincing. "I fell. With style." The guards were closing in, but they stopped. The cameras were zooming in. The entire galaxy was watching the alien princess kneeling in the wreckage of a diplomatic ceremony, weeping over a human mechanic. Lyris looked up. Her eyes were not the cold, distant gold of royalty. They were fierce. They were wet with tears. They were human. She reached out and cupped Ryan's face, smearing a streak of his blood on her glowing skin. "Stay awake," she commanded, her voice fierce. "Do not you dare close your eyes, Ryan Kalin. You promised—" "I am here," Ryan whispered, his hand coming up to cover hers. Lyris looked out at the sea of stunned faces. She looked at the cameras. She looked at the wreckage of the lies her father and Kale had built. She stood up, but she didn't let go of Ryan's hand. She pulled him up with her, supporting his weight, letting him lean against her. "Listen to me," she shouted. Her voice didn't need a microphone, it rang with the authority of a woman who had walked through fire. "This man," she pointed to the bleeding human beside her. "This mechanic, he is not a diplomat. He is not a king. He is a soldier you threw away, and he is the only one who tried to save us." She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on the cowering delegates. "You look at us and you see tools," she declared, her voice trembling with rage. "You see weapons to be fired. You see symbols to be traded. You see bodies to be used." She ripped the torn fabric of her gown further, exposing the glowing scars on her shoulder, the biomods, the brands of the Empire. "My body is not your property," she screamed. "It is not a bomb. It is not a bargaining chip. It is mine." She turned to the camera drones, staring directly into the lens, addressing the billions watching across 2 star systems. "There is no peace in a treaty built on lies," she said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper that carried more weight than her shouting. "You cannot build a future by sacrificing people without their consent. That is not peace. That is just slower violence." She looked at Ryan. He was swaying, pale, but he was looking at her with a pride that burned brighter than any star. "We are done being your weapons," Lyris said. "Humans, Velians, we are done." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the shift of history. Then, Ryan let out a wet, rattling cough. He looked at the massive screen where his own face was currently being projected, pale and bloody, next to the radiant princess. "Great," he mumbled, his voice picked up by Lyris's lavalier mic. "I am bleeding out on galactic television, and you are stealing my spotlight with a monologue." Lyris looked down at him. A laugh bubbled up in her chest, hysterical, wet, and full of love. She laughed in front of the galaxy. "I am the princess," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I always get the best lines." The tension in the room snapped. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a tragedy, and a romance, and a farce all at once. It was real. Security forces from the Earth delegation finally rushed the stage, not to arrest them, but to secure the perimeter. Lord Kale, who had been trying to crawl toward his gun, was pinned to the floor by 3 human Marines and a Valiant honor guard who had seen the evidence. "It is over," Rian breathed, his legs finally giving out. He slid down to the floor. Lyris went with him, cradling his head in her lap. "Medic!" she screamed. "Get a medic up here!" But it wasn't over. Deep inside Lyris's chest, the bio-node gave a final mournful beep. Rian's datapad, lying on the floor, flashed red. Failsafe activated. Secondary protocol engaged. Total system purge in T-minus 30 seconds. "Lyris!" Rian gasped, looking at the screen. "The backup." Kale didn't trust the remote signal. He set a dead man switch. Lyris felt it. The heat returned, sharper this time. The node was going to detonate. It wasn't going to be a controlled overload this time. It was going to be a core breach. "Get away from me," Lyris whispered, horror flooding her face. She tried to push Rian away. "Ryan, get up! Run! It is going to blow!" "No!" Rian gritted out, grabbing her wrist. "I am not leaving!" "You have to!" she cried, the glowing patterns on her skin turning an angry, throbbing red. "I can't stop this one. It is too much energy. If you stay connected to the link, it will fry your brain. Cut the link. Rian, save yourself." Rian looked at her. He was bleeding. He was exhausted. He was dying. And he smiled. "We go together," he whispered. "Remember?" He reached up and tapped the interface on his wrist. He didn't cut the connection. He opened it wide. "Bleed it," Ryan commanded. "Don't push it out into the air. Push it into the grid. Use the interface. Use me as the ground." "It will kill you. It will kill us both if you don't," Ryan yelled. "Trust me, Lyris, do it." Lyris looked at him. She saw the absolute certainty in his eyes. He was offering himself not as a shield, but as a lightning rod. She closed her eyes. She reached for the burning star in her chest. She grabbed the energy, and she shoved it down the wire. The sensation was indescribable. It was like being unmade. The energy poured out of her, through the neural link, through Ryan's interface, and into the station's floor panels. Rian screamed. His body arched off the floor, every muscle seizing as the raw power of a Velian weapon surged through him. But he held on. He kept the channel open. The energy hit the station's power grid, outside, in the vacuum of space. The station Asterion lit up, from the solar arrays to the docking clamps. A wave of brilliant, harmless light swept across the hull. It was a storm of gold and violet electricity that danced over the spires and the viewports. It was visible from the surface of the planet below. It was visible from the Velian flagship. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. Inside the hall, the lights blew out. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Then, silence. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hall in a dim, amber glow. On the center of the dais, amidst the scorch marks and the debris, 2 figures lay side by side. Ryan lay on his back, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged hitches. Smoke curled from the interface unit on his wrist, which had melted into a lump of plastic and metal. Lyris lay beside him, her skin dull. The bioluminescence faded to a faint, ghostly shimmer. They were still. The crowd held its breath. The guards lowered their weapons, and the medics froze. Then, Ryan's hand twitched. His fingers moved across the scorched floor plating. They sought something. Lyris's hand moved. Their fingers brushed. They hooked together, a weak, trembling grip. Rian let out a long, wheezing breath. Still. "Here," he rasped. Lyris turned her head. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but she was alive. Still here, she whispered back. She squeezed his hand. The image froze there. Two broken people on a dirty floor, surrounded by the ruins of an empire's ambition, holding on to each other as the only solid thing in a spinning universe. The media drones hovered silent and low, broadcasting the image to the stars. It wasn't the image of a treaty signing. It was something stronger. It was the image of peace. The recovery room smelled of ozone and crushed lilies. It was a strange, hybrid scent, the smell of human antiseptic mixed with the floral, metallic aroma of Velian biogel. Ryan drifted up from the darkness slowly. His body felt heavy, but not with pain. It was a comfortable, anchored heaviness, like waking up under a weighted blanket after a fever had finally broken. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the soft amber lighting of the medical bay. He tried to move his right arm, the one that had taken the bullet, the one that had acted as the conduit for the entire energy reserves of a Velian weapon. He expected stiffness. He expected the phantom ache of destroyed nerves. Instead, he saw light. Ryan lifted his arm, where the jagged tear of the kinetic round had been, and where the skin had been scorched by the energy surge. There was no red scar tissue. Instead, the flesh had knit together with a smooth, pearlescent finish. Running through the new skin were faint, branching lines of violet and gold, pulsing softly in time with his own heartbeat. He stared at it, mesmerized. He looked like a piece of pottery repaired with gold lacquer. "It is called biointegration," a soft voice said from the side of the bed. Ryan turned. Lyris was sitting there in a chair that looked too small for her regal bearing. She was wearing simple civilian clothes, a loose gray tunic and trousers, and her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in a silver wave. She looked exhausted, dark circles bruising the skin under her eyes, but the frantic, weaponized pulsing of her biomarkings was gone. Her skin glowed with a steady, calm warmth, like a candle flame in a windless room. "You have been asleep for 3 days," she said, her voice husky. 3 days, Ryan croaked. His throat felt like he had swallowed a desert. "I missed my shift." Lyris let out a short, wet laugh. She reached out and took his hand, the one with the glowing lines. Her fingers traced the new patterns on his skin, her touch feather-light. "The medical drones could not repair the nerve damage with standard grafts," she explained, her eyes fixed on his arm. "Your nervous system was fried. I authorized them to use Velian stem gel. It bonded with your tissues, and it adapted to the energy residue you were holding." She looked up at him, and her eyes were swimming with tears. "You carry a piece of my world in your body now. Ryan, you are part Velian." Ryan looked at the glowing lines, then at her. He flexed his fingers. They moved with a fluid grace he hadn't possessed before. "Well," Ryan whispered, a crooked grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We are matching now, like poorly planned tattoos from a shore leave in Bangkok." Lyris laughed again, but this time a sob broke through. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against their joined hands. Ryan reached out with his other hand and stroked her hair. "I thought I killed you," she whispered into his skin. "When the surge hit, you screamed. Ryan, I have never heard a sound like that. I thought I had burned you out." "You didn't," Ryan said softly. "We held the line, remember?" She lifted her head. The distance between them was negligible. Ryan leaned in, ignoring the stiffness in his neck, and pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't a desperate kiss like the one in the pod, nor a frantic one like the moment on the stage. It was soft. It was slow. It tasted of water and relief. It was the kiss of two people who had looked into the abyss, jumped in, and somehow washed up on the same shore. When they pulled apart, Lyris rested her forehead against his. We are alive, she breathed. We are, Ryan agreed. Now tell me, did we win? They had not just won, they had changed the game entirely. The aftermath of the Asterian incident, as the networks were calling it, was a political tsunami. The footage of Lord Kael Viran conspiring with Ares Corp had been broadcast to every colony in the sector. There was no spinning it, no cover-up. The evidence Lyris had purged from her own mind was watertight. Kael was currently in a high-security brig on a neutral moon, awaiting trial for treason against 2 species. The Emperor, faced with the undeniable proof of his own complicity in the weaponization of his daughter, had suffered a health crisis and retreated into seclusion, leaving a power vacuum that the reformist faction was eager to fill. 2 weeks after Ryan woke up, the station held a joint forum to ratify the revised Treaty of Solvara. This time, there were no hidden agendas. The hall was packed, but the atmosphere was different. It wasn't festive, it was sober, reflective, and determined. Ryan stood at the podium. He felt ridiculous in a formal suit, the collar itching his neck, but Lyris had insisted. She stood in the front row, watching him with shining eyes. Ryan looked out at the sea of faces, human and Velian, sitting mixed together rather than on separate sides of the aisle. "I am not a diplomat," Ryan began, his voice amplified through the hall. "I am a mechanic. I fix things that are broken. For a long time, I thought that meant machines. But I realized recently that we have been breaking people just as efficiently as we break ships." He looked down at his hand, tracing the glowing line that ran up his wrist visible under his cuff. "I was taught to look at a Velian and see a target," Ryan continued. "I was taught that their bodies were wrong, that their skin was a warning sign. I looked through a scope, and I didn't see a life. I saw an enemy asset." He paused, meeting the gaze of a Velian general in the 3rd row. "Then I collided with someone in a hallway," Ryan said, a ripple of laughter moving through the crowd. "And I learned that the body isn't a uniform, it is a home. It is where we keep our fear, our stories, and our hope. When I look at you now, I don't see enemies. I see people trying to keep their homes safe. And that is something I can build a peace on." The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a release of tension that had been building for 50 years. Then, it was Lyris's turn. She ascended the stage not as a decoration but as a leader. She wore no armor. Her gown was simple, her movements unconstrained. "My people have a saying," Lyris spoke, her voice melodious and strong. "Form follows function. For generations, my function was to be a symbol. My body was engineered to be perfect, to be silent, and ultimately, to be sacrificed." She looked directly at the camera drones. "I accepted that. I thought endurance was strength. I thought that suffering in silence was nobility." She looked at Ryan, who was standing in the wings, watching her with a look of pure adoration. "I was wrong," Lyris declared. "Love taught me that true strength is not enduring the path others set for you. It is cutting your own path. It is choosing to live, not just to survive." From this day forward, the Velian Empire will no longer weaponize its children. No bio-node will ever be implanted without consent. No body will be owned by the state. We are not tools. We are the architects of our own future. The resulting legislation was swift and sweeping. The Lyris Accords were drafted, codifying bodily autonomy as a fundamental right across both human and Velian territories. The treaty was signed not with secret handshakes, but with a public ceremony overseen by a council of citizens, teachers, engineers, doctors, and veterans. But saving the galaxy was, in some ways, easier than learning how to cook dinner. Rian's apartment on the station had become their sanctuary. It was small, cluttered with engine parts and books. But to Lyris, it was a palace because it was theirs. "Okay," Ryan said, holding up a wooden spoon. "Explain to me again what this vegetable is." Lyris was chopping a purple tuber-like root on the counter. "It is called a fire root. It is a delicacy on my homeworld. It is spicy." "Spicy," Rian repeated skeptically. "Lyris, the juice is sizzling on the cutting board. That is the flavor escaping," she said brightly. "Now, we add it to the broth." "I feel like I need a hazmat suit," Ryan muttered, but he tipped the chopped root into the pan. Immediately, the broth turned a violent shade of neon blue and began to bubble aggressively. A plume of steam rose up, smelling like cinnamon and tear gas. "It is reacting," Ryan shouted, backing away. "The spoon! It is eating the spoon!" Lyris peered into the pot. Sure enough, the wooden spoon was dissolving into the blue sludge. "Ah," she said, looking sheepish. "I forgot. Fire root requires ceramic cookware. Wood accelerates the enzyme." Rian looked at the melting spoon, then at her. He started to laugh. "So, take out?" he asked. "Take out," Lyris agreed, tossing the rest of the root into the waste disposal unit. They sat on the floor of his living room, eating synth noodles from a carton, laughing until their sides hurt. It was these moments, the chaotic, messy, low-stakes moments, that felt like the real victory. A few nights later, they tried dancing. There was a zero-gravity recreation center on Deck 5 that had been open to mixed couples. Rian had promised to teach her how to waltz, claiming his mother had taught him. "This is not a waltz," Lyris giggled as she spun upside down, her feet kicking the ceiling. "It is a waltz in 3 dimensions," Rian argued, grabbing her hand to pull her back down. "The physics are just uncooperative." They drifted in the center of the room, music playing softly over the comms. Rian managed to get an arm around her waist, anchoring them together. They spun slowly, a binary planet system of 2. "I stepped on your foot." Ryan winced. "I did not feel it," Lyris smiled. "I was floating 6 inches above the floor." "Right. Convenient." They bumped gently into the padded wall. Rian didn't push off immediately. He held her there, suspended in the air. His face changed, the laughter softening into something tender. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Too close?" They had these check-ins often. They were learning to navigate the map of each other's trauma. Some days, Lyris couldn't handle sudden loud noises. Some days, Rian couldn't handle being in a confined space. "I am okay," Lyris whispered. "With you, I am always okay." She drifted closer, wrapping her legs around his waist, her arms around his neck. They floated there, turning slowly in the silence, learning that their bodies could be used for joy, for play, for holding on without hurting. The true test of their new reality came on their last night on the station. They had rented a private cabin on the outer ring, a place with a massive viewport that looked out into deep space. The lights were dimmed. The hum of the station was a distant vibration. They lay on the bed, fully clothed, lying on their sides facing each other. The distance between them was bridged by their interlaced fingers. Rian watched the light play across Lyris's face. She was tracing the line of his jaw with her thumb. The bioluminescence on her skin was a soft, rhythmic pulse of indigo, the color of deep ocean of calm. "Rian," she whispered. "Yeah?" She hesitated. Her eyes searched his. "Do you like my body, human?" The question was the same one she had asked in the corridor months ago, but the tone was entirely different. Back then, it had been a shield, a weapon, a taunt thrown by a woman who expected to be objectified. Now, it was small. It was vulnerable. It was a question asked by a woman who had been cut open and put back together, asking if the pieces were still worth loving. Rian didn't smile. He didn't make a joke. He moved his hand from her hours, sliding it up her arm. He traced the glowing sigil on her shoulder. He moved his hand to her waist, feeling the curve of her hip, the solid reality of her. "I love the way you glow when you laugh," Ryan said softly. "I love that when I wake up in the middle of the night. I can see you without turning on a lamp." He moved his hand to her chest, resting it over her heart, the place where the bomb had been. "I love that your heartbeat steadies when I hold you," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I love your hands. I love that they are strong enough to crush a rifle, but they shake when you are scared, and you still reach for me anyway." He looked into her golden eyes. "I love this body," Rian whispered, "not because it is perfect, but because it carries you, because it survived, because it came back to me." Lyris let out a shaky breath, a tear slipping down her nose. She reached out and touched the glowing scar on his arm. "And I love this," she murmured, tracing the gold line. "I love that you carry my light in your skin. I love that you are proof that kindness is stronger than kinetic force." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "You are my home, Rian, and you are mine." Their lips met. It wasn't tentative anymore. It was a claiming. It was a deepening. Rian pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair. Lyris pressed against him, her body arching into his touch. Her skin flared with a brilliant, warm gold, lighting up the dim cabin. Their breathing became ragged. The clothes felt like barriers. But there was no rush. There was no fear. For the first time in their lives, they were not soldiers, or symbols, or mechanics, or princesses. They were just a man and a woman, safe in the dark, exploring the infinite universe of each other. The camera pulled back, leaving them to the privacy of the starlight, their silhouettes merging into one as the scene faded. 6 months later, the observation deck of the starship Vanguard was quiet. The ship was a new class, a joint vessel built by human and Velian engineers. It was the flagship of the new diplomatic corps. Rian stood by the viewport, watching the station Asterion recede into the distance. It looked like a glittering toy against the velvet black of space. He wore a new uniform, a deep blue coat with silver trim, the insignia of a peace envoy on the collar. It was stiff, and he was still getting used to it, but he stood straighter now. The weight of the ghosts was gone. "You are doing it again," a voice teased. Lyris stepped up beside him. She wore a matching coat, tailored to fit her form, her hair braided back with simple silver wire. She looked radiant, authoritative, and happy. "Doing what?" Ryan smiled, not looking away from the stars. "Drifting," she said, bumping his shoulder with hers. "You are lost in thought." Rian turned to her. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Just thinking about how far we have to go," he admitted. "The core worlds are not going to be easy. There is still a lot of hate out there. A lot of people who don't want to believe that a mechanic and a princess can rewrite the rules." "Let them hate," Lyris said, a dangerous, mischievous light sparking in her eyes. The same light he had seen that first day in the corridor. "We have faced down emperors and armies, Ryan. A few grumpy politicians do not scare me." She stepped closer, sliding her arms around his waist. "Besides," she whispered, leaning up to his ear, "stay close, human. If you collide with me again, I won't complain." Rian laughed, a sound that came from the bottom of his chest. "I plan on colliding with you," he promised. Often. He pulled her gently into his arms. Behind them, the ship's drive engaged. The stars outside the viewport began to stretch, turning from static points of light into long, brilliant streaks of white and gold. Rian kissed her. It was a kiss of promise, of adventure, of a future that was wide open. Their shared desire was no longer a secret to be hidden or a trauma to be feared. It was the engine of the life they had chosen. It was bright, it was fierce, and it was just beginning. As the ship jumped to warp, vanishing into the streak of light, they were holding on tight, two bodies, one heart, racing toward the horizon.